Imagine arriving at a railway station on a cold morning in Northern Europe. The platform is crowded with people going to work, students carrying bags, parents trying to keep sleepy children close, and one family whose faces would stop you for a second only because they do not look quite like anyone in our world. They are shorter and more powerfully built than most of the people around them. Their noses are broad, their faces project slightly forward, and the shape above their eyes is unmistakable. The mother is checking a message on her phone. The father is balancing 2 cups of coffee. Their daughter is complaining that she forgot an assignment. Nobody on the platform is surprised to see them. They are Neanderthals, and they have been part of ordinary human life for as long as history remembers. Tonight we are asking what the world might look like if Neanderthals had never disappeared as a distinct population. Not if one hidden tribe had somehow survived in a remote valley until modern explorers found it, and not if scientists recreated them from ancient DNA. We are imagining something much larger and more difficult. 40,000 additional years of contact, competition, friendship, intermarriage, trade, prejudice, cooperation, war, law, religion, science, and ordinary family life between 2 closely related forms of human. The first surprise is that this alternate world might not contain 2 perfectly separate species at all. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred in real history. Their descendants were fertile often enough for Neanderthal ancestry to remain in living populations. If both lineages had survived in large numbers and continued meeting, the boundary between them could have become blurred. Some communities might have remained genetically and culturally distinctive. Others might have mixed for thousands of generations. By the present day, people could argue over whether Neanderthals were a separate species, a human subspecies, a cluster of populations, or one end of a broad biological continuum. The disagreement would not be confined to museums. It could affect citizenship, medicine, marriage law, identity, and the words people used for themselves. So our story will begin with what is actually known, because the better we understand the real Neanderthals, the more believable the alternate history becomes. Then we will change one small part of the past. A few vulnerable populations survive when, in our history, they declined. From there we will follow the consequences through the last ice age, the rise of farming, the first cities, empires and religions, the scientific revolution, industrialization, the age of nationalism, and finally the modern world. Some possibilities will be hopeful. Others will be uncomfortable because human history has rarely responded gently to visible difference. The interesting answer is not a perfect world in which everyone immediately recognizes one another as equals. It is a complicated world in which moral progress, cruelty, cooperation, and survival all remain possible at the same time. For now, let the station fade and travel backward. The electric lights disappear. The rails sink beneath soil. Buildings become forest. Forest becomes open steppe, and the cold deepens until we reach Europe more than 40,000 years ago. 2 human populations are moving through the same landscapes. They are close enough to recognize one another, different enough to notice, and neither can know that the meetings between them will shape the future of every person who comes after. Neanderthals were not a crude rehearsal for modern humanity. They were a successful lineage of people who lived across Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. The oldest fossils clearly placed within the Neanderthal lineage reach back roughly 400,000 years, although their deeper ancestry is older and the boundaries between named groups are debated. They endured repeated cycles of cold and relative warmth, moved across vast territories, hunted large animals, used fire, made complex tools, and raised children in environments that would challenge most people even with modern equipment. Their bodies carried adaptations to those environments. On average, Neanderthals were shorter and more robust than recent humans, with thick bones, broad trunks, powerful limbs, and large joint surfaces. A compact body loses heat more slowly than a long, narrow one, although cold was probably not the only force shaping their anatomy. Their faces had large nasal openings and a projecting middle region. Their skulls were long and low, with prominent brow ridges and no modern human chin. Dressed in present-day clothing, a Neanderthal would look distinctive but recognizably human. The old image of a stooped creature dragging its knuckles came partly from an early reconstruction of an elderly skeleton affected by severe arthritis. Healthy Neanderthals walked upright. Their brains were large, often within or above the range of recent humans, but brain volume alone tells us very little about how a mind works. Researchers have proposed differences in development, internal organization, vision, and the demands of controlling a more robust body, but these remain difficult to reconstruct from skulls. It would be irresponsible to assign an entire living personality to them from bone shape. We cannot confidently say that Neanderthals were naturally better engineers, poorer storytellers, less social, more visual, or any of the other neat contrasts that alternate histories often assume. Their cognition was expressed through behavior, and the behavioral record shows planning, learning, flexibility, and culture. One of their best-known technological traditions is called the Mysterian. Neanderthal toolmakers often prepared a stone core so that a later strike removed a flake with a planned shape. The process required knowledge of fracture, motor control, and a sequence of actions extending beyond the immediate blow. They produced scrapers, points, cutting flakes, and other tools adapted to local needs. In some places, they attached stone pieces to wooden shafts using adhesives such as birch tar or mixtures containing bitumen. Experiments show that tar can be produced through more than one method, some simpler than once thought, but the repeated manufacture and use of adhesives still demonstrates practical knowledge passed between generations. Wood rarely survives, which means much of their technology has vanished. Preserved spears and hunting evidence show that Neanderthals sometimes attacked large animals at dangerous distances. Some weapons may have been thrust, others thrown over shorter ranges, and hunting strategies probably varied across time and place. Close encounters with horses, bison, deer, and other large prey required planning and cooperation. The frequency of injuries in some skeletons reminds us that successful hunting could still be violent and uncertain. The more revealing detail is that many injuries healed. Someone survived because food was brought, movement was assisted, and a group continued supporting an individual who could not hunt normally for a time. Care extended beyond temporary fractures. Several Neanderthal individuals lived with major impairments, missing teeth, damaged limbs, or chronic disease. One famous skeleton from Shanidar Cave survived serious injuries and considerable disability. Exactly how much help he required remains debated, but his survival demonstrates that Neanderthal life was not simply a constant removal of anyone who became vulnerable. Their communities were small and resources were uncertain, which made long-term care costly. They paid that cost often enough for compassion to become visible in bone tens of thousands of years later. Neanderthal diet was diverse. Isotopic evidence shows that meat from large herbivores was important for many populations, but dental calculus, plant remains, residues, and coastal sites reveal a wider menu. Some groups ate starchy plants, nuts, fungi, and other gathered foods. Coastal communities used shellfish, fish, and marine mammals where those resources were available. At Newmark Nord, recent research has added evidence for intensive processing of large animal remains. There was no single Neanderthal diet, just as there is no single modern human diet. People living beside the Mediterranean encountered a different world from people surviving on cold northern plains. Fire was central to this life, although archaeologists still debate how continuously it was available in every region and period. Hearths offered heat, protection, light, and a way to transform food. They also created a social center. Around a fire, tools could be repaired, hides worked, injuries examined, children taught, and plans made. We do not know what was said there, but silence is unlikely. Neanderthal anatomy included a hyoid bone comparable to ours. Their hearing was suited to speech frequencies, and they carried a version of FOXP2 associated with speech and language in living humans. None of those facts proves that their language sounded or worked exactly like ours. Together with the complexity of their social lives, they make some form of rich vocal communication highly plausible. Symbolic behavior remains one of the most debated parts of the evidence. Neanderthals used pigments, collected unusual objects, modified bird talons and feathers, and in some places pierced or colored shells. Some cave markings and paintings in Iberia have been attributed to Neanderthals because proposed dates precede known modern human presence, but those dates and interpretations remain contested. The safest conclusion is not that every disputed object proves art exactly like ours. It is that the old claim that Neanderthals lived without symbols, decoration, or aesthetic choice has become increasingly difficult to defend. Burial is similarly complex. Several bodies appear to have been deliberately placed, and renewed work at Shanidar has strengthened the case that at least some Neanderthals treated the dead in intentional ways. The famous story that one person was buried on a bed of flowers is uncertain. Pollen may have been moved by animals or natural processes. Yet flowers are not required for the deeper point. A body arranged and protected from immediate disturbance suggests that death changed how the group treated one of its members. Whether the act expressed grief, ritual, hygiene, memory, or several things at once cannot be recovered with certainty. The people doing all of this probably lived in small communities. Ancient DNA from caves in Siberia has identified close relatives, including a father and daughter, within a group of Neanderthal remains. The same research found low genetic diversity and patterns suggesting women may sometimes have moved between communities more often than men. We should not turn one site into a universal social rule, but the evidence supports a world of small, connected groups rather than isolated individuals. Small population size would later become central to their vulnerability. And then modern humans arrived in greater numbers. The encounter was not one event. It unfolded across regions and generations. People traded ideas or materials in some places, competed in others, and formed families in enough cases to leave a permanent genetic record. Recent genomes help place a major episode of interbreeding shared by the ancestors of living non-African populations roughly between 49 and 45,000 years ago. Many living people outside Africa carry around 2% Neanderthal ancestry, with the exact amount varying, and smaller amounts can also be found in some African populations through later movements of people. Across all living humans, researchers have recovered a much larger portion of the Neanderthal genome in scattered fragments. The discovery of Denisova 11 makes the intimacy of ancient contact impossible to ignore. She was a young person whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. Her father also carried older Neanderthal ancestry. One small bone fragment revealed that different human lineages did not merely pass one another at the edge of a map. Sometimes they formed direct families. Why, then, did Neanderthals disappear as a recognizable population around 40,000 years ago? No single explanation has one. Climate changed rapidly, but Neanderthals had survived severe changes before. Their population was small, fragmented, and genetically vulnerable. Modern humans may have had larger networks, greater numbers, or different technologies in some contexts, but broad claims of simple superiority are difficult to prove. Disease could have mattered. Competition could have mattered. Interbreeding and demographic absorption almost certainly mattered. Recent models show that repeated movement of even relatively small numbers of Homo sapiens into Neanderthal communities could gradually replace much of their ancestry without a single campaign of extermination. Extinction may therefore be the wrong emotional image. The end could have been a mixture of deaths, failed births, lost communities, migration, competition, and families whose descendants were increasingly counted as something else. Our alternate history begins by changing demography rather than intelligence. Around 42,000 years ago, several Neanderthal regions avoid the worst possible combination of pressure. A chain of communities survives in the mountains and valleys of the Caucasus. Other groups remain along the northern Mediterranean and in parts of Central Europe. Their numbers are still small, but not so small that every winter threatens the entire lineage. They maintain contact across wider distances, perhaps because encounters with expanding Homo sapiens bring new exchange routes, new tools, and new reasons to travel. Nothing about this requires Neanderthals to defeat modern humans or suddenly invent an impossible technology. It requires enough children to survive, enough communities to remain connected, and enough intermarriage to create cooperation without complete absorption. A few thousand additional people, distributed across several refuges, could change the long-term outcome. Population history is sensitive to small differences. One group lost in an avalanche, one outbreak, or one decade of failed births can erase a branch. The opposite is also true. A mild sequence of seasons, a successful alliance, or access to a richer hunting ground can carry a lineage through its most dangerous century. The first generations of continued coexistence would not think of themselves as representatives of species. They would know local communities, accents, bodies, customs, and kin. A Neanderthal group might distinguish nearby Homo sapiens allies from distant Neanderthal rivals more sharply than it distinguished all Neanderthals from all modern humans. Identity in small-scale societies is rarely organized according to taxonomic charts. It grows from marriage, obligation, territory, memory, and who comes when help is needed. Contact zones would become especially important. Imagine a river valley used seasonally by both populations. One group knows the high slopes and cold weather routes. Another maintains ties with communities farther south. They exchange stone, hides, food, information, and eventually people. Children born from mixed unions would not be abstract hybrids. They would be relatives connecting two networks. Some would remain with one community, some with the other, and some might help form settlements whose customs belonged fully to neither tradition. Interbreeding creates a difficult consequence for our thought experiment. If it continued freely for 40,000 years, a sharply separate Neanderthal lineage might vanish through blending even while every individual survived. To keep recognizably Neanderthal populations into the present, some barriers must also persist. Geography could provide them at first. High mountains, cold northern regions, and fragmented habitats would reduce constant movement. Cultural preference could provide another barrier. People often marry within language, religion, class, or community without any biological inability to marry outside it. Neanderthal groups might maintain distinctive kinship rules and seasonal territories while still exchanging spouses occasionally. The result would not be a clean border. It would be a gradient. Some communities would carry mostly Neanderthal ancestry, some mostly Homo sapiens ancestry, and many a mixture. Physical traits would not sort into two perfect boxes. A person with a prominent brow and compact body might have a sibling whose appearance is less distinctive. Language, clothing, and family history could matter more than anatomy. Even in the deep past, the question of who counts as Neanderthal would already have more than one answer. This prolonged contact would transform both cultures. A tool associated archaeologically with one population might be adopted by the other, making future archaeologists far less confident about who made what. Hunting methods would spread. Decorative forms would be copied and changed. Words would move between languages. Stories would acquire characters from neighboring traditions. The archaeological record would become less like two lines and more like braided rope. The last glacial maximum, roughly 26 to 19,000 years ago, would be a severe test. Ice sheets would cover large areas of the north. Habitable zones would contract, and communities would be pushed into southern refuges. Neanderthal descended groups adapted to cold would still need food, shelter, and social support. Anatomy alone would not save them from collapsing ecosystems. Survival would depend on cooperation and mobility. This crisis could increase both conflict and mixture. Groups crowded into the same valleys might fight over game and shelter. They might also build larger alliances because no small community could manage every risk alone. Exchange networks connecting Iberia, Italy, the Balkans, the Black Sea region, and Western Asia could grow. Children would hear several languages. Technologies would circulate faster. By the time ice began retreating, the communities emerging northward would already contain tens of thousands of years of shared history. One winter in this alternate past would become part of stories told for generations, even though later versions would disagree about almost every detail. A band with strong Neanderthal ancestry reaches a limestone valley after weeks of failed hunting. The herd they followed has moved south. Two older hunters are injured, and the group has only a few days of dried meat left. Smoke is already rising from a shelter farther down the valley, where a larger Homo sapiens community has stored fish, roots, and fuel. Both groups understand the danger of approaching. They have traded before, but they have also fought. A woman from the smaller band walks forward without a weapon in her hands. A young man from the settlement meets her halfway. Neither language is fully understood, yet both contain borrowed words from earlier contact. They point toward the empty hills, count children, and name relatives known to both communities. The settlement cannot feed everyone indefinitely. The newcomers possess knowledge of a high route where reindeer may return after the next storm. An agreement forms through gestures, repeated phrases, and the presence of two mixed families already living behind the settlement wall. For the rest of the winter, the groups share fuel, watch schedules, hunting information, and the risk of infection. They argue. One family leaves after a dispute over food. An elder dies and is buried according to customs neither community follows exactly. By spring, several marriages have been promised and a joint hunting party has found the returning herd. No one present thinks they have saved a lineage. They have solved a winter problem. Yet alternate history is often built from decisions that feel small to the people making them. One valley remains connected to another. A few more children survive. A community that might have disappeared becomes part of a larger network, and the future stays open. The repopulation of Europe would create a patchwork. Some northern territories might be settled mainly by communities with high Neanderthal ancestry. Other routes would be dominated by Homo sapiens groups. Mixed populations would occupy major rivers and coasts. The distribution would never remain fixed because climate, marriage, trade, and local success would keep moving people. There would be no simple Neanderthal continent beside a modern human continent. There would be regions where different ancestries and traditions were more common, connected by broad zones in which they had blended. This ancient patchwork would matter when farming arrived. The spread of agriculture after roughly 12,000 years ago was not a single invention sweeping through empty land. Farming populations moved, local hunter-gatherers adopted some practices, and ways of life mixed differently in different regions. In our alternate history, Neanderthal descended communities would face the same choices. Some would adopt crops and livestock quickly. Others would remain hunters, fishers, and foragers for centuries. The decision would depend on ecology and social opportunity, not on a biological inability to understand farming. A stocky body adapted to mobile life in cold climates might initially fare poorly on some early agricultural diets, but so did many Homo sapiens farmers. Dense settlements brought infection, repetitive labor, dental disease, and periods of malnutrition. Farming increased the number of people a landscape could support while often making individual lives harder. Neanderthal communities would not be protected from those costs, nor would they be incapable of changing. Over generations, natural selection and culture would reshape bodies, diets, and disease resistance in every population. Some Neanderthal-descended groups might become pastoralists rather than crop farmers, moving animals through highlands and cold grasslands. Their deep knowledge of seasonal landscapes could fit well with herding, although this is a cultural possibility, not an inherited destiny. Others might become settled grain farmers in river valleys. Mixed towns would appear around trade routes, with marriage and adoption making ancestry difficult to separate from language and occupation. The first permanent villages would force new questions. A small mobile group can resolve conflict through kinship, reputation, or separation. A settlement containing hundreds or thousands of people needs rules for land, storage, inheritance, and violence. If residents visibly belong to different lineages, those rules could become equal, unequal, or something in between. One village might divide work and rights by ancestry. Another might organize people by clan without caring about biology. A third might reserve certain rituals for families claiming descent from the oldest local inhabitants. This is where alternate history becomes morally uncomfortable. Humans in our world have built hierarchies around ancestry, language, religion, appearance, sex, and class. A world containing visibly distinct archaic and modern human populations would provide another boundary around which power could organize. Neanderthals might be enslaved, displaced, idealized, feared, or treated as sacred relatives depending on the society. They might also conquer, exclude, and dominate others. There is no reason to imagine prejudice flowing in only one direction, and no reason to assume biological difference automatically determines political power. At the same time, long contact would make absolute separation difficult. A ruler claiming that two peoples must never mix might discover that royal families already contain ancestors from both. Farmers categorized as Neanderthal might speak the same language and worship the same gods as neighbors categorized as sapiens. A person could be accepted in one town and reclassified in another. Law would attempt to draw boundaries that family trees continually crossed. By the time the first large cities rose, the central fact of human diversity would be built into civilization from the beginning. Scribes would record marriages between lineages. Merchants would travel through districts associated with different communities. Army units might recruit from populations known, fairly or unfairly, for particular skills. Art would portray faces with a wider range of shapes than our museums contain. Myth would remember ancient meetings between peoples, sometimes as alliances, sometimes as betrayals, and sometimes as unions between founders. We should resist making the Neanderthals of these cities into unchanged Ice Age people wearing bronze jewelry. 40,000 years of evolution and cultural history would transform them. Diet, disease, climate, migration, and intermarriage would alter their bodies. Languages would change completely. A Neanderthal citizen of an ancient city might have no more direct knowledge of Mysterian toolmaking than a modern office worker has of the first stone tools made by Homo sapiens. Deep ancestry would remain, but culture would not be frozen in a cave. The earliest states would inherit these ambiguities. Writing systems might include separate words for lineage, community, mixed ancestry, and legal status. Census tablets could classify people in ways that later generations find crude. Some kingdoms might grant full membership through residence or loyalty. Others might connect taxation, military service, marriage, and property to ancestry. Religion would respond early because the existence of more than one kind of human would be impossible to ignore. Creation stories could describe two peoples shaped from different earth, breath, ice, or fire. Some traditions might say they were made together and given complementary duties. Others might place one above the other. Religious arguments that appeared much later in our history about the moral standing of unfamiliar peoples would begin near the birth of organized theology. The deepest philosophical question would be simple to state and difficult to escape. What makes someone a person? Is it ancestry, speech, reason, suffering, family, participation in law, or the ability to recognize obligations? Neanderthals would answer that question merely by living. They would raise children, negotiate, create, remember the dead, and complain about unfair treatment. A philosophy claiming that only Homo sapiens possessed moral worth would have to survive daily contact with neighbors whose inner lives were visible. This would not guarantee generosity. People are talented at inventing exceptions. A society might acknowledge that Neanderthals feel pain and still deny them equal rights. It might praise their loyalty while refusing them political power. It could treat mixed children as bridges in one period and threats in another. The history of moral progress would still be a history of people demanding that principles already spoken in temples and courts be applied consistently. Imagine a city on the eastern Mediterranean 3,000 years ago. Ships unload timber, copper, grain, and dyed cloth. The harbor contains sailors from several languages and both major human lineages. A Neanderthal-descended shipwright supervises repairs to a hull. A mixed ancestry merchant keeps accounts in two scripts. A priest is arguing with a visiting philosopher over whether the law's word for citizen includes anyone adopted into a household or only those whose grandparents belong to recognized communities. A dispute in that harbor city shows how quickly grand philosophy becomes an ordinary legal problem. A merchant has died while traveling. He leaves a warehouse, 2 ships, and 3 children. His eldest daughter was born to a Neanderthal descended mother from the northern quarter. His younger sons were born to a Homo sapiens citizen from a family recognized by the city. The son's relatives claim the daughter cannot inherit because an old tablet uses a word that once referred only to members of their lineage. The daughter answers that she served in the household, kept the accounts, and paid the city's taxes while her brothers were still children. The court is crowded because everyone understands that the decision reaches beyond one family. Merchants fear uncertainty in contracts. Priests fear that changing the old word will offend tradition. Dockworkers from both lineages wait outside. The judge asks whether adopted children inherit. They do. He asks whether foreigners granted citizenship inherit. They do. Then he asks what purpose the law was meant to serve. Preserving one anatomy, or preserving responsibility within a household. The ruling grants the daughter an equal share. It does not end prejudice. A later king may reverse it. Another city may reach the opposite conclusion. But scribes copy the judge's reasoning, and the words travel with merchants to other ports. Centuries later, reformers quote the case as evidence that citizenship was always capable of becoming wider. This is how a second human lineage would change history most deeply. Not through one miraculous Neanderthal invention, but through thousands of moments in which institutions are forced to decide whether familiar principles apply to someone whose face makes the question impossible to ignore. Nothing about the scene requires a special Neanderthal civilization isolated from everyone else. The more plausible world is one in which ancestry intersects with class, sex, citizenship, occupation, and region, A wealthy Neanderthal merchant could hold more power than a poor Homo sapiens laborer. In another kingdom, the hierarchy could be reversed. People would use whichever distinction supported existing power. Armies would accelerate mixture. Ancient states moved soldiers across long distances, settled veterans on conquered land, and absorbed captives. Neanderthal and Homo sapiens soldiers would fight beside one another and against one another. Military writers might make sweeping claims about the courage, endurance, or discipline of entire populations, just as writers in our history created stereotypes about neighboring peoples. Some claims might reflect average body differences. Many would be political mythology. War could also produce terrifying forms of dehumanization. An enemy already described as a separate kind of human would be easier for propagandists to place outside moral rules. Victorious states might display captured Neanderthals as proof of conquest or describe Homo sapiens rivals as weak and deceptive. Mass violence would not be inevitable, but the conceptual tools for justifying it would be readily available. At other times, the existence of two lineages could make alliances more valuable. A frontier kingdom combining several populations might resist a larger empire precisely because its communities supplied different languages, trade connections, and regional knowledge. Marriage between ruling families could symbolize peace. Epic poems might celebrate a founder whose parents came from two peoples and who therefore understood both. Literature would preserve these relationships in ways archaeology cannot. We might possess tragedies about lovers forbidden to marry across lineage, comedies built around mistaken identity, and legal dramas about inheritance in mixed families. Heroes could be praised for crossing boundaries, while monsters might be imagined as beings who have lost the moral qualities shared by both forms of humanity. The word human itself could become broader very early, defined by participation in language and community rather than by one anatomy. Art would be richer in variation, though not because Neanderthals possessed a magical aesthetic unavailable to us. Artists respond to traditions, materials, patrons, and individual talent. 40,000 years of surviving Neanderthal cultures would produce sculpture, textile, music, architecture, and storytelling as varied as any other long human history. Some traditions might preserve symbols connected to mountains, caves, animals, or ancestral lands. Others would be fully urban and cosmopolitan. A modern listener could no more identify all Neanderthal-descended music by sound than we can reduce the music of an entire continent to one scale. The question of language is especially interesting. Any language spoken by Neanderthals 40,000 years ago would change beyond recognition over such a long period. Even languages separated by only a few thousand years can become mutually unintelligible. There would be no single modern Neanderthal language. There might be families of languages descended from ancient communities, along with countless languages adopted from Homo sapiens neighbors and mixed societies. Their phonetic patterns might reflect small anatomical differences, but culture can reshape speech enormously. Some Neanderthal-descended populations might use sound contrasts difficult for others to learn. Others would speak languages indistinguishable from those of their neighbors. Multilingualism would be common in contact zones. Loanwords could preserve faint evidence of ancient exchange, perhaps terms for snow conditions, stone qualities, kinship, or animals traveling from one language family into another. Writing would further transform identity. Once traditions are recorded, communities can imagine themselves across centuries and distances. A Neanderthal-descended population might preserve chronicles describing migration from an Ice Age refuge, though oral memory could not reliably carry exact events across tens of thousands of years. Ancient origin stories would blend history and myth. Archaeology and genetics, when they eventually appeared, would challenge those stories just as they challenge national myths in our world. Law would face practical questions that our history never encountered in exactly the same form. Could a person be legally assigned to a lineage against their will? How much ancestry counted? Did appearance matter more than family record? What status belonged to a child whose parents were classified differently? Could someone enter a lineage through adoption or marriage? Every answer would reveal that biology does not produce a clean social category. In societies obsessed with descent, scribes might build elaborate family registries. Yet after thousands of years of mixing, those registries would expose the instability of the system. A ruler declaring one lineage pure could discover that purity existed only as a political story. Genetic boundaries would be porous. Many traits would vary continuously. People could look more Neanderthal than their measured ancestry suggested, or inherit few visible traits despite close Neanderthal relatives. Other societies might avoid formal classification and organize identity through language, neighborhood, religion, and self-identification. This would not remove prejudice, but it would shift its form. Someone might be mocked for an accent or family origin rather than assigned a biological category by the state. In cosmopolitan cities, mixed identity could become normal enough that strict separation seemed provincial. Trade routes would connect distant Neanderthal descended populations that no longer resembled one another culturally. A highland pastoral community in the Caucasus might share deep ancestry with craftspeople in a northern port while speaking unrelated languages and following different religions. The idea of a worldwide Neanderthal people could arise only much later, perhaps through scholars comparing anatomy and history. It might then become a source of solidarity, nationalism, or both. That late discovery would be important. People do not automatically build political identity from every biological relationship. Large modern racial categories are historical constructions layered over complex ancestry. In the same way, a pan-Neanderthal identity could be invented, debated, and mobilized rather than inherited unchanged from prehistory. Some communities would embrace it. Others would reject being grouped with distant strangers simply because outsiders saw similar faces. By the classical age, philosophy might have developed a more explicit distinction between personhood and lineage. Thinkers would observe that members of both populations reason, suffer, form obligations, and participate in civic life. A school of thought might declare that rational beings share one moral community. Another might argue that nature created fixed hierarchies. These arguments would travel through empires and religions, available to later reformers and oppressors alike. The existence of Neanderthals would also reshape humanity's place in nature. In our world, many cultures placed humans in a unique category separated from animals. A second human lineage would complicate that boundary without destroying it. Are both equally human? If so, what do they share that other animals lack? The answer might focus less on appearance and more on language, moral agency, or social life. Or it might expand concern toward other intelligent species earlier than in our history. The great religions of later antiquity would need clear positions. Missionaries would preach among both populations. Theological debates could ask whether sacred ancestors included all humans or one lineage, whether intermarriage required special rights, and whether spiritual equality implied political equality. Some traditions might produce powerful universal doctrines. Others might preserve divisions in law even while teaching equality before the divine. A single sentence in an ancient religious text could shape centuries. If it unmistakably included both peoples within one moral family, reformers would quote it whenever rulers built barriers. If it described them separately, interpreters might struggle over whether difference meant hierarchy or simply diversity. As in our world, texts would not speak alone. Institutions would choose how to read them. The most likely ancient world would therefore not be a harmonious partnership between two specialized minds. It would be recognizably human. periods of mixture and separation, cities where ancestry mattered little, frontiers where it mattered intensely, rulers exploiting difference, families crossing it, and philosophers trying to decide which parts of ordinary moral experience should become universal law. As empires expanded and collapsed, disease would become as important as armies. Neanderthal populations had evolved in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years, while Homo sapiens carried a different history of exposure. At first contact, pathogens could move unevenly in both directions. Over millennia, however, repeated contact and interbreeding would reduce some differences while creating a complex landscape of immunity. Living Neanderthal populations would offer medicine a comparison unavailable in our world, but before modern science, that difference might be interpreted through superstition. If one community suffered less during an epidemic, neighbors could credit diet, ancestry, divine protection, or witchcraft. If another suffered more, rulers might blame the victims rather than crowded housing or unequal access to food. Biological variation would become entangled with fear. The plague pandemics of the medieval world would be a dramatic test. Dense cities, trade routes, rodents, and fleas would carry disease across every lineage. Some genetic variants could alter risk, but no population would possess simple immunity. Epidemics would kill families indiscriminately enough to weaken fantasies of complete separation, while local differences in mortality could strengthen them elsewhere. Survivors would rebuild towns containing new mixtures of people after labor shortages changed social power. During a plague year, those principles would be tested under fear. Imagine a walled city where bells have been sounding for days. A rumor spreads that the illness began in a district with many Neanderthal families. The rumor is false, but it offers frightened people a simple target. Shops refuse customers from that district. Guards block one gate. A preacher announces that the shape of a person's brow reveals hidden corruption. Inside a small infirmary, two healers keep records. One is a Neanderthal descended woman trained by a religious order. The other is a Homo sapiens physician from a wealthy family. They notice that mortality follows crowding, hunger, and the speed with which sick people are isolated far more closely than it follows lineage. They cannot see bacteria or fleas. They do not know the mechanism, but they can count beds, households, and days. When officials demand separate wards for the two populations, the healers object. Separation by ancestry would move healthy people into crowded rooms and make the outbreak worse. They propose dividing patients by symptoms and exposure instead. The council resists until a prominent Homo sapiens household falls ill after receiving cloth from an infected warehouse. The neat story of a lineage-specific plague begins to collapse. The city still suffers terribly. Knowledge is too limited to prevent that. Yet the surviving records show that careful observation challenged a convenient prejudice. Later physicians study the tables and find no simple immunity belonging to either group. In some regions, similar evidence is ignored and persecution intensifies. In this city, at least, a frightened population learns that disease follows contact and conditions more reliably than the categories people use to blame one another. The lesson would have to be learned repeatedly. Biology can influence risk, but social fear exaggerates every difference and invents many that are not there. Medicine itself might advance through comparison earlier, although not automatically. Physicians could notice that some treatments or diseases affected populations differently. Without genetics or controlled trials, those observations might produce useful practices, false theories, or both. A broad nose, robust skeleton, or family identity could become a diagnostic shortcut even when irrelevant. The history of medicine would include repeated struggles to separate real biological difference from social stereotype. The medieval city would make coexistence ordinary. A visitor might pass a Neanderthal-descended blacksmith, a Homo sapiens scholar, a mixed ancestry baker, and a judge whose lineage was disputed by political enemies. Guilds could include or exclude by ancestry. Marriage laws might vary between neighborhoods. Religious festivals could blend traditions older than any written record. Physical work would not belong naturally to one lineage, even if stereotypes claimed otherwise. Neanderthal anatomy in the Ice Age would have been transformed by thousands of years of diet, disease, and changing labor. Individuals would vary widely. Some rulers might nevertheless direct Neanderthal-descended people toward mining, construction, or military service on the assumption that robust bodies made them suitable. That assumption could become self-reinforcing when education and property were denied. In other regions, Neanderthal communities might dominate land, trade, or government. A mountain kingdom descended from ancient refuges could preserve political independence for centuries. Its rulers might construct an origin story presenting Neanderthals as the first people of the land and later Homo sapiens arrivals as guests. Such a state could protect culture and provide security, or turn ancestry into its own hierarchy. Exploration and overseas expansion would carry these distinctions across the globe. By the 15th and 16th centuries, European societies in our alternate world might include many mixed communities and several states with strong Neanderthal identity. Ships would transport sailors and soldiers of both lineages. Encounters with peoples in Africa, Asia, the Americas, and the Pacific would challenge European categories. This history could become even more violent than ours, not less. Colonizers might use the existence of a recognized second human lineage to build elaborate theories ranking all peoples by supposed proximity to one type or another. They could misclassify unfamiliar populations, invent measurements, and turn anatomy into justification for conquest. The presence of real average differences would give pseudoscience material to misuse, without making its political conclusions valid. Or the long experience of two human lineages might weaken some forms of colonial ideology. Societies already accustomed to defining personhood beyond one anatomy could be better prepared to recognize unfamiliar peoples as fully human. Universal religious and legal traditions might explicitly reject lineage as a basis for enslavement. Both possibilities are plausible. Historical experience creates tools for empathy and tools for oppression. People decide which to use. The transatlantic slave trade, if it still emerged, could map ancestry onto slavery in complex ways. Some Neanderthal-descended states might participate as traders or colonial powers. Others might be enslaved or racialized. Mixed populations would undermine neat categories, prompting authorities to invent rules based on grandparents, appearance, or legal status. The cruelty of such systems would not disappear because classification was scientifically incoherent. In our history, incoherence did not prevent exploitation. Resistance movements would draw on the deepest philosophical traditions of this world. Abolitionists could argue that humanity had always contained more than one form, and that moral worth could not depend on skull shape or descent. Formerly enslaved writers might expose how governments changed definitions whenever profit required it. Neanderthal and Homo sapiens activists could build alliances or compete over whose suffering received attention. Meanwhile, the scientific revolution would begin transforming the question itself. Anatomists would compare skeletons. Naturalists would classify humans alongside other animals. Fossils resembling living Neanderthals would be found in caves and recognized not as mysterious extinct creatures, but as ancient relatives of people still present. The study of deep time would become personal and political immediately. Imagine the first excavation of a very ancient Neanderthal skeleton in a society where Neanderthals are living citizens. Researchers would not be studying an extinct other. They would be opening a grave connected, however distantly, to a living community. Questions of permission, ownership, and respectful treatment would arise centuries earlier. Museums could not display remains without debate over whether those remains were ancestors. The discovery of evolution would become even more explosive. Charles Darwin's theory, or something like it, would have to explain two living human lineages and their ability to interbreed. Neanderthals would offer visible evidence that humanity had branched and changed. Opponents of evolution might use their existence in theological arguments. Supporters might misuse them as a supposed intermediate form, despite the fact that they were cousins rather than ancestors of modern humans. Taxonomy would become political. Naming Neanderthals Homo neanderthalensis could be interpreted as recognition of distinct history or an attempt to place them outside Homo sapiens. Naming them Homo sapiens neanderthalensis could suggest unity or a race identity. Scientific labels would carry consequences far beyond laboratories because law might refer to species. Researchers would eventually discover that species boundaries are not always sharp. Closely related populations can exchange genes while remaining distinct in some traits. The history of Neanderthal and sapiens interbreeding would become a central example. Biology students would learn early that nature often produces gradients and branching networks rather than clean boxes. That lesson might improve public understanding of human variation, but it would not eliminate essentialism. People often prefer simple categories even when science offers complexity. Newspapers could report average differences as if every individual followed them. Employers might use medical findings to discriminate. Politicians could select whichever scientific language supported their goals. Industrialization would intensify these conflicts. Factories and mines would demand labor. If Neanderthal-descended workers were already concentrated in physically demanding occupations, employers might praise their strength while paying them less, claiming that such work suited their nature. When machines reduce the advantage of physical power, the same workers could be dismissed as obsolete. A flattering stereotype can become exploitation without changing its words. Cities would grow quickly, drawing rural populations into crowded neighborhoods. Mixed marriages would increase. Old regional identities would collide with national censuses demanding fixed categories. Some people would choose an identity for political protection. Others would conceal ancestry to avoid discrimination. Family photographs would reveal variation that official forms could not contain. The industrial age would also create mass education and newspapers. Neanderthal intellectuals, artists, scientists, and politicians would become visible to audiences too large to dismiss them as exceptions. A celebrated mathematician or novelist could challenge claims of inferiority, although equality should never have required extraordinary achievement. Autobiographies would describe the experience of moving through institutions designed around one body and one history. Physical design would matter in practical ways. Average differences in stature, limb proportions, facial shape, and perhaps metabolism could affect protective equipment, uniforms, furniture, and medical devices. Early factories might ignore these needs, causing injury. Reformers would demand standards tested across the full range of human bodies. The principle of universal design could develop partly through Neanderthal activism and later benefit many others. Pseudoscience would remain a grave danger. The 19th and early 20th centuries in our history produced racial measurement, eugenics, forced sterilization, and claims that complex social outcomes could be read from skulls. A world with living Neanderthals would give these movements a highly visible target. Researchers might rank skull forms, brain volumes, test scores, crime, and poverty while ignoring education, discrimination, and culture. Some eugenicists could argue that interbreeding weakened both lineages. Others might promote it as a way to absorb a minority population. Governments could regulate marriage, immigration, and reproduction. Medical procedures could be imposed without consent. The fact that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens had already mixed for tens of thousands of years would not stop ideologues from inventing purity. Opposition would also be powerful. Geneticists and anthropologists who understood variation could demonstrate that categories overlapped, that individual ability could not be inferred from ancestry, and that all living populations contained complex histories. Religious leaders, labor movements, and civil rights organizations might unite around the principle that no form of humanity should be treated as breeding stock for the state. The world wars would bring the darkest possible use of lineage politics. Nationalist regimes might define Neanderthal populations as ancient owners of a territory, dangerous outsiders, or biological enemies. Other states might recruit them into units based on stereotypes of strength or cold tolerance. Propaganda would exaggerate facial differences until neighbors appeared monstrous. Genocide would be a real possibility. It would be dishonest to avoid it. Modern states possess administrative power that ancient prejudice lacked: census records, transport systems, mass media, weapons, and institutions capable of identifying families. A regime committed to biological hierarchy could persecute people classified as Neanderthal, sapiens, or mixed. Survivors would later insist that taxonomy never again determine whether someone belonged within law. The aftermath could produce an international declaration not merely of human rights, but of the rights of all human lineages. Its language would be debated carefully. Would it use person, human being, hominin, citizen, or conscious individual? The choice would matter because law would be trying to place moral unity above biological variation. Decolonization and civil rights movements would intertwine with Neanderthal rights. Some activists would see one universal struggle against inherited hierarchy. Others would argue that each history required separate recognition. Neanderthal communities could demand land rights, language protection, political autonomy, compensation, and control over ancestral remains. After the World Wars, one hearing would be remembered more clearly than many speeches. Delegates are drafting an international declaration while evidence of camps, forced classifications, medical experiments, and destroyed communities is still being collected. The room contains diplomats, lawyers, religious leaders, scientists, and survivors from several lineages. Everyone agrees that the old order failed. They disagree about the words that should replace it. A Neanderthal-descended schoolteacher gives testimony. Before the war, he taught literature in a mixed town. A government census reclassified his family according to measurements taken by officials. His wife, whose ancestry was less visible, received different papers. Their children were placed in separate legal categories despite sharing the same parents. He explains that the violence did not begin with weapons. It began when a form claimed that a complicated family could be reduced to one box, and that the box determined which protections still applied. One delegate proposes guaranteeing rights to every member of Homo sapiens. A scientist objects that the wording could exclude people if taxonomy changed. Another proposes every rational being, but survivors warn that governments had already called children irrational and disabled people defective. Finally, the document uses a broader principle. Every person of every human lineage possesses equal dignity and protection under law. The sentence does not repair destroyed lives. It does not prevent future discrimination, but it moves moral status away from skull shape, ancestry percentage, and scientific fashion. Courts later cite it. Students memorize it. Activists use it against governments that signed the declaration and failed to obey it. In this alternate history, equality would not arrive because two lineages naturally understood one another. It would arrive through evidence, loss, argument, and people insisting that no classification can place a life outside the protection of law. By the late 20th century, Public life would contain both remarkable integration and persistent inequality. A Neanderthal-descended person could lead a government, win a scientific prize, or become a famous actor, while poorer communities still face discrimination in housing and employment. Representation would matter, but it would not substitute for material equality. Then genetics would arrive, and every old category would become unstable again. The first complete comparisons of living Neanderthal and Homo sapiens genomes would not reveal two pure, sealed populations. They would reveal layers of contact. Some DNA segments would show ancient exchanges dating back tens of thousands of years. Others would reflect recent marriages. Many people officially classified in one group would carry substantial ancestry from the other, and the amount would vary continuously across geography. This would make genetics politically explosive. People who had built identity around purity could discover mixed ancestry. Governments might try to define legal categories using percentages, only to learn that ancestry estimates change when reference populations and methods change. A person could be 20% by one model and 30 by another, while neither number explained language, family, loyalty, or lived experience. The lesson would be clear to scientists and difficult for society. Genetic ancestry is real, but social identity cannot be reduced to a number. Genes record inheritance. They do not decide which community raised someone, which history they claim, or how they should be treated. Living Neanderthal populations would transform biomedical research. In our world, researchers study fragments of Neanderthal ancestry carried by modern humans and compare a small number of ancient genomes. That work has connected archaic variants to immune responses, skin biology, metabolism, pain sensitivity, sleep patterns, fertility, and disease risk. Some associations are strong, others modest or population-specific, and none define a person. In the alternate world, researchers could examine complete living genomes, cells, physiology, and medical outcomes. They might discover variants that protect against particular infections, alter inflammatory responses, affect drug metabolism, or change risk for autoimmune disease. The comparison could reveal biological mechanisms hidden when everyone's study belongs to one surviving lineage. This scientific opportunity would come with serious ethical danger. Neanderthal communities might remember centuries of being measured and ranked. They could reasonably distrust researchers promising that a new study was purely beneficial. Who owns cell lines, genomes, and medical discoveries? Could a company patent a treatment developed from a variant common in one population? Would individuals receive privacy and compensation? Would insurers use ancestry to change prices? Ethical medicine would require community participation, informed consent, and strict rules against turning averages into assumptions about patients. A doctor should not treat a Neanderthal person as a representative specimen. The patient in front of them would still have a unique history, environment, and combination of genes. Anatomical differences would matter in some areas. Medical imaging reference ranges, airway equipment, orthopedic implants, drug dosages, and surgical procedures might need validation across populations. A robust skeleton does not make someone invulnerable. A larger average chest or different facial structure can change how equipment fits without changing moral status or intellectual potential. A second living lineage could also improve our understanding of aging and development. Researchers might compare how bones grow when brains mature, how immune systems change, and which diseases appear with age. Yet 40,000 years of continued evolution would mean modern Neanderthals were not identical to Ice Age fossils. They would have adapted to agriculture, cities, new pathogens, and modern diets. Scientists could not simply use them as windows into prehistory. That misunderstanding would be common in popular culture. Documentaries might ask a modern Neanderthal family to demonstrate ancient hunting techniques they had never practiced. Tourists could expect communities to live in caves or preserve an unbroken Ice Age ceremony. Neanderthal people would repeatedly have to explain that ancestry is not reenactment. Museums would face a different history. Ancient Neanderthal remains would be recognized as human ancestors connected to living communities. Exhibitions would involve consultation. Some remains might be repatriated and reburied. Others could be studied under agreements balancing knowledge and respect. The old practice of displaying skeletons as curiosities would be challenged earlier and more forcefully. Archaeology would become a form of family history. When excavators uncovered a hearth, a child's tooth, or a burial, living Neanderthal communities might feel the discovery personally, even when no direct genealogy could be traced. Oral traditions could guide research. Those stories carried across millennia would need to be treated as culture rather than literal records. Archaeologists would learn to work with descendants instead of speaking for them. The debate over cave art would feel different too. A claim that a painting was made by Neanderthals would not merely upgrade the reputation of an extinct group. It could become part of national heritage, cultural pride, and political conflict. Communities might disagree over ownership. Scholars would face pressure from people who wanted a particular date to confirm an identity. This makes scientific humility especially important. In our world, claims about Neanderthal art, burial, music, and cognition are often simplified as soon as they enter headlines. The alternate world would contain the same temptation, intensified by living politics. Responsible researchers would distinguish secure evidence from plausible inference and speculation. Not knowing would sometimes be the most honest answer. Schools would teach human evolution as a branching, interconnected story. Children would learn that several human lineages once existed and that at least two survive. They would see family trees with crossing lines rather than a ladder climbing toward one final form. The idea that evolution has a predetermined winner would be harder to sustain. An ordinary classroom might include children who identify as Neanderthal, sapiens, mixed, or none of those labels. Their abilities would vary far more within categories than stereotypes predict. Some teachers might still assume that Neanderthal children were naturally suited to spatial tasks or physical work. Good education would resist this by responding to the individual rather than assigning a destiny from ancestry. There could be meaningful average differences in body development, sensory processing, or disease risk. The challenge would be discussing them without turning statistics into character. An average tells us something about populations under specific conditions. It does not tell us whether one child will be a poet, engineer, athlete, nurse, or musician. Sports would make this problem visible. If some average anatomical differences remained, certain populations might be overrepresented in particular events. But 40,000 years of mixing, training, nutrition, and individual variation would prevent simple species leagues from being scientifically neat. Organizers would struggle with whether competition should be divided by lineage, body measurements, or not at all. A blanket separation could stigmatize athletes and ignore mixed ancestry. No separation could create fairness concerns in events where a particular anatomical trait mattered strongly. The debate might resemble present disputes over weight classes, sex categories, disability classification, and technology, but with even more historical weight. There would be no single solution across every sport. Daily architecture would adapt more easily. Furniture, protective equipment, vehicle interiors, respirators, and public spaces would be designed around a broader range of bodies. This could produce a culture of inclusive design that benefits everyone. A station doorway created for wide variation in shoulder breadth also helps travelers carrying children or luggage. A mask available in more facial shapes fits more people safely. Cities might contain neighborhoods with strong Neanderthal cultural history, just as cities in our world contain linguistic, religious, and diasporic communities. Restaurants could serve regional cuisines shaped by local ingredients, not a universal prehistoric menu. Music venues could host traditions that trace identity through many centuries of change. Political murals might portray ancient ancestors beside modern workers. Some Neanderthal languages might survive as minority languages. Others would have disappeared through conquest, migration, or assimilation. Language revival movements could reconstruct pronunciation from old recordings and documents, not from skull anatomy. Communities would argue over whether a revived language belonged to everyone with ancestry or primarily to descendants of its historical speakers. Popular culture would alternate between fascination and stereotype. Films might portray Neanderthal characters as noble, strong, mystical, violent, earthy, emotionally simple, or unusually honest. Actors would protest roles written as biological cliches. Comedians would expose how absurd those cliches were. Advertisers would exploit distinctive features until audiences demanded change. Beauty standards would be broader and still unfair. In some periods, robust faces and prominent brows could be fashionable. In others, people might undergo surgery to hide them. Mixed features might be celebrated as cosmopolitan or attacked as evidence of lost purity. The market would find ways to profit from insecurity in every community. Dating and family life would reveal how ordinary the deepest question had become. Some people would strongly prefer partners from their own lineage for cultural, religious, or personal reasons. Others would not care. Dating apps might include ancestry filters, creating controversy. Families could argue over the identity in which a child should be raised. Fertility would likely be possible across populations, as it was in ancient history, but not necessarily identical in every pairing. Some genetic combinations may have been selected against after ancient admixture in our world. Living researchers could study whether certain reproductive risks differed. Any medical guidance would need care to avoid reviving eugenic ideas. A mixed family at dinner would not spend every evening discussing human evolution. Parents would ask about school. Someone would forget to buy bread. A grandparent would complain that younger people no longer speak the old language properly. The importance of this image is precisely its ordinariness. 40,000 years of coexistence would make what seems extraordinary to us into background. Yet identity would become more intense during political crisis. Economic decline, migration, war, or disease could revive claims that one population was taking resources from another. Politicians might promise to protect ancient land or restore demographic balance. Social media would spread fabricated stories tailored to visible anxieties. Genetic data could become a tool of surveillance. A state might build ancestry databases under the language of medical planning or historical research. Police could use them to identify families. Immigration systems might demand biological proof of belonging. Communities with long memories of persecution would resist, and courts would face the question of whether genetic information deserves special protection. At the same time, shared ancestry would repeatedly undermine extremist stories. Almost every population would contain evidence of ancient mixing. Families classified on opposite sides of a conflict could be closer genetically than nationalist myths allowed. Scientists and historians would show that no community had remained untouched for 40,000 years. Whether those facts reduced hatred would depend on culture. Evidence does not automatically defeat identity. People can accept mixture and still build hierarchy. The strongest protection would come from institutions. Equal law, independent courts, education, political representation, and social conditions that make difference less useful to those seeking power. Modern democracy might reserve seats for historically marginalized Neanderthal communities, recognize territorial autonomy, or treat lineage as a private identity with no formal political role. Different countries would choose different arrangements. A state with a concentrated indigenous Neanderthal population would face different needs from a city where ancestry had blended for millennia. International organizations could include a forum for human lineage rights. Much as our world has institutions addressing indigenous peoples, minorities, and cultural heritage, debates would focus on language loss, land, genetic research, discrimination, and the treatment of ancestral remains. Critics would worry that official recognition hardened categories. Supporters would argue that pretending difference no longer mattered allowed old inequalities to continue. There would be no final stage in which the question disappeared. Identity evolves. A young person might consider lineage central, while their sibling treats it as one background detail. One generation might fight for the right to assimilate. The next might fight for the right not to. The modern world would therefore be neither a simple celebration of diversity nor an endless species conflict. It would contain the same tension found throughout our history. People want to belong to particular communities and also to be treated as individuals. They want heritage recognized without having their future determined by it. Technology in this world would not divide neatly into Neanderthal inventions and Homo sapiens inventions. Innovation depends on population size, institutions, education, resources, communication, and luck. Any average cognitive differences that survived 40,000 years would interact with all of those factors. It would be tempting for historians to attribute architecture, navigation, mathematics, or music to one lineage, but such stories would often confuse access with ability. A society that educated one population and excluded another would later point to unequal achievements as proof that exclusion was natural. When barriers fell, the record would change. Neanderthal scientists and engineers would appear in fields from materials research to medicine, not because a dormant biological talent had finally awakened, but because institutions had stopped wasting people. The existence of two living lineages might nevertheless sharpen research into human cognition. Psychologists could compare perception, memory, development, and social learning across populations. The most important finding would probably be complexity. Some differences might be measurable at the group level. They would overlap heavily, vary by environment, and resist simple rankings. Brain imaging could reveal average variations in shape or connectivity, but scientists would warn that different does not mean better or worse. A brain allocates resources within a whole organism. A feature supporting one task may trade against another or have no simple effect outside a specific context. The old habit of reading destiny from brain volume would be treated as a historical warning. Neanderthal communities would contribute their own research priorities. Rather than allowing outside institutions to ask only how they differ from Homo sapiens, they might fund studies of health problems affecting their populations, document linguistic heritage, and challenge methods built around sapiens reference data. Science would become more accurate when the people being studied helped decide the questions. Artificial intelligence would introduce a new philosophical layer. A world that had spent millennia debating the rights of more than one human lineage might be better prepared to ask whether personhood depends on species. Neanderthal philosophers could remind everyone that moral exclusion once hid behind confident claims about anatomy. Others would warn that comparing machines to a living population risks trivializing real history. The existence of Neanderthals would not answer whether an artificial system is conscious, but it could change the moral vocabulary. People might distinguish biological lineage, intelligence, consciousness, citizenship, and personhood more carefully. Humanity would already know that no single skull shape or genetic label contains all the traits that matter. The same history could influence treatment of animals. If moral philosophy had long emphasized capacities shared across different forms of human, some thinkers might extend concern toward apes, elephants, cetaceans, and other socially complex animals earlier. Others would defend a boundary around all human lineages. The debate would be richer, not necessarily resolved. Conservation would carry a personal lesson. Neanderthals survived in our alternate world because vulnerable populations remained connected and large enough to recover. Their ancient history would become a famous example of how close demographic decline can come to irreversible loss. Conservationists might invoke it when protecting fragmented populations of other species. But Neanderthals themselves would not be conservation objects. Calling a living people an endangered species could be insulting or politically dangerous. If a small, culturally distinct Neanderthal population faced low birth rates, the response would need to protect individual freedom rather than treating women and families as instruments for preserving a genome. Cultural continuity and biological continuity are not the same goal. Imagine a modern mountain community whose residents carry high Neanderthal ancestry and speak a language found nowhere else. Young people are leaving for cities. The school is shrinking. Elders fear that songs, place names, and oral history will vanish. A government program offers grants, digital archives, and remote work infrastructure. Some residents welcome it. Others worry that turning the village into heritage tourism will preserve a performance while daily life disappears. The question facing that community is familiar from our world. How can a culture remain alive rather than become a museum? Genetic survival offers no answer. A community can preserve ancestry while losing language, land, and memory. It can also welcome newcomers and change while maintaining a recognizable tradition. Survival is not stillness. In a large city, Neanderthal identity could take a very different form. Young artists might combine old motifs with electronic music. Activists could reclaim a word once used as an insult. Mixed ancestry people might create new labels or reject labels entirely. Online communities would connect people whose ancestors separated thousands of years ago. Commercial culture would imitate these movements quickly. Fashion companies would sell exaggerated brow designs, reconstructed Ice Age patterns, and products claiming to match Neanderthal metabolism. Most claims would be nonsense. Scientists would spend considerable time explaining that no supplement can activate an ancient hunter inside someone. Food marketing would be especially absurd. Restaurants might advertise a true Neanderthal diet despite clear evidence that ancient diets varied by environment and modern Neanderthals had eaten agricultural foods for thousands of years. Some customers would insist on enormous portions of meat. Coastal Neanderthal historians would point out that their ancestors gathered shellfish and plants too. These small examples matter because they show how modern society turns identity into entertainment and consumption. A living lineage would be represented through scholarship, family, politics, humor, and also souvenirs. Neanderthal people would not agree among themselves about what respectful representation looked like. Their humor might be one of the strongest forms of resistance. We have no archaeological evidence for Neanderthal jokes, because laughter leaves no fossil. A living tradition would remove that mystery completely. Comedians could mock Homo sapiens stereotypes, ancestry tests, museum reconstructions, and the endless question of what Neanderthals are naturally good at. A joke can expose the absurdity of a category faster than a lecture. Music would be equally varied. The controversial bone from Divj Babe would still attract debate over whether it was a flute or an animal-chewed fragment. But living Neanderthal music would not descend in a simple line from one Paleolithic object. It would contain classical traditions, folk forms, religious music, popular songs, and experimental genres. Some instruments might preserve unusual designs. Most musicians would use whatever instruments history made available. Language and art would make the loss in our real history feel especially clear. In our world, we can infer that Neanderthals used pigments, collected talents, taught toolmaking, and probably communicated richly. We cannot ask what those acts meant. In the alternate world, their descendants could offer traditions, but even they would not know the exact thoughts of someone 40,000 years earlier. Survival preserves continuity, not perfect memory. An ancient name would still be lost unless writing or a durable oral chain carried it. No living Neanderthal could tell researchers what a particular individual at Shanidar called her child. Deep time erases personal detail even when descendants survive. The difference is that the lineage would still possess voices capable of telling its later history in the first person. This distinction would reshape museums. An exhibit might begin with Ice Age tools and continue through farming villages, medieval manuscripts, industrial labor movements, modern novels, and family photographs. Neanderthal history would not stop at extinction. It would become one of the longest continuous human histories on Earth. Visitors might be surprised by how quickly the ancient anatomy stops feeling central. After the first rooms, the story would concern taxes, migration, worship, war, love, education, and music. Biology would remain part of it, but culture would occupy most of the space, because 40,000 years of life produces far more than a set of skeletal traits. The most famous public debate might concern the word species. Some biologists would argue that long periods of separate evolution and recognizable anatomical differences justify calling Neanderthals Homo neanderthalensis. Others would emphasize ancient and recent gene flow and use Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. Many Neanderthal people would view both labels as external. For some, species status could support recognition as a distinct people with unique history. For others, it could sound like exclusion from humanity. Activists might prefer lineage, people, nation, ancestry, or simply human. There would be no scientifically neutral word because language carries social memory. The law would eventually avoid making rights depend on taxonomy. A constitution might state that every person born of any human lineage possesses equal civil status. This would protect rights even if scientists revise classification. The lesson would be that moral inclusion should not wait for perfect agreement about labels. Citizenship could still involve collective rights. Indigenous Neanderthal nations might govern territory, protect language, and control archaeological sites. These rights would arise from history and political relationship, not from a claim that every person with similar DNA belongs to one nation. Some countries might recognize more than one official human lineage in the census. Others could remove the question entirely. Data can reveal discrimination, but categories can also harden it. Governments would repeatedly debate whether measuring inequality requires naming groups or whether naming groups perpetuates division. Medical records would face a similar tension. Ancestry can sometimes improve risk estimates, but broad labels are poor substitutes for actual genes, environment, and individual history. Modern precision medicine might reduce reliance on lineage categories by measuring relevant variants directly. That could make care more accurate while weakening biological stereotypes. One of the greatest scientific discoveries might be that many features associated with Neanderthal ancestry are not fixed packages. Recombination separates genes over generations. A person can inherit immune variants without the facial traits outsiders expect, or robust anatomy without a particular metabolic profile. The concept of a single Neanderthal essence would dissolve under genetic detail. That discovery would echo something families already knew. Siblings differ. Children surprise parents. Ancestry provides possibilities, not a script. A modern university could make this visible. In one laboratory, researchers study a Neanderthal-derived immune pathway. Across campus, a Neanderthal historian criticizes the language used in the grant proposal. In a design studio, students are creating protective masks that fit a wider range of faces. At a cafe, two students are arguing over whether an ancestry-based student society feels supportive or outdated. None of them represents all Neanderthals. That is the essential change from our world. Extinct people can be turned into one image because they cannot object. Living people interrupt every generalization. This would also change paleoanthropology emotionally. Researchers excavating a Neanderthal burial would work with descendants who might disagree among themselves. Some would support destructive sampling for DNA because the knowledge matters. Others would oppose drilling into ancestral bone. Science would have to negotiate rather than assume access. The result might be slower research in some cases and better research overall. Questions of respect often improve methods by forcing scientists to explain why a sample is needed, how data will be stored, and who benefits. Living Neanderthals would make ancient DNA a field of relationship, not simply extraction. And perhaps the most moving difference would be language. In our world, scientists can reconstruct genes and anatomy with increasing precision, but no method can recover a conversation. In the alternate world, one could sit with a Neanderthal grandmother and ask what her community remembers, what jokes survive, what words cannot be translated cleanly, and how she feels when strangers call her ancient. Her answer would probably resist the question. She might say she is not ancient. She was born in 1958. Her family moved to the city when she was a child. She worked as a nurse. She likes detective novels and dislikes the music her grandchildren play. History would be present in her face and family story, but it would not contain her. That ordinary refusal to become a symbol may be the most important sign that Neanderthals truly survived. There are several broad ways the biology of this alternate world could unfold, and they lead to very different presents. In the first, continued interbreeding is so common that Neanderthals gradually cease to exist as a sharply distinct biological population. Their ancestry becomes much more widespread and much less diluted than in our world. Regional populations retain different proportions and visible traits, but there is no clear line where Homo sapiens ends and Neanderthal begins. This is perhaps the most biologically straightforward outcome. The two lineages already produced fertile descendants. If millions of people lived together through migration, farming, empire, and urbanization, gene flow would be difficult to stop. Over 40,000 years, even modest intermarriage could spread ancestry widely. In this world, the question, what if Neanderthals never went extinct, has a subtle answer. They survive through absorption. Everyone in Europe and Western Asia, and many people elsewhere through later migration, carries substantial Neanderthal ancestry. Some anatomical traits remain common in the North and West. Others spread globally. Neanderthal identity may survive culturally in a few regions, but biologists no longer recognize a separate population. The moral story would be less about coexistence between two species and more about how categories dissolve. Ancient Neanderthals would not vanish, but their descendants would become inseparable from humanity as a whole. Textbooks might describe a fusion of lineages rather than one replacing another. In the second outcome, geographical and cultural barriers preserve several populations with high Neanderthal ancestry. Interbreeding occurs, but most people marry within local communities for much of history. These populations evolve alongside Homo sapiens neighbors and remain visibly distinct enough that the public recognizes two broad lineages. This is the world we have explored most often tonight. It produces complex politics, minority rights, mixed families, and a debate over species status. It is plausible only if barriers remain strong for a very long time. Yet human history provides many examples of communities maintaining identity across centuries through geography, religion, language, and endogamy. The populations would not be Ice Age fossils. Natural selection, nutrition, and mixture would change them. They might still show robust average anatomy and distinctive craniofacial features, but the range would overlap substantially with Homo sapiens. Cultural difference could be greater than biological difference. In the third outcome, a Neanderthal majority region develops enough political power to preserve territory and limit absorption. Perhaps mountain refuges form the core of an early state. Perhaps a confederation controls important trade routes. Over time, it becomes a nation with its own language, families, institutions, and historical memory. This could protect continuity while creating international tension. Neighboring empires might conquer it, ally with it, or romanticize it. Modern nationalism could turn the state into a symbol of ancient survival. Diaspora communities would carry Neanderthal identity around the world. A strong state would not guarantee equality within it. Homo sapiens minorities could face discrimination there, just as Neanderthals might elsewhere. The alternate world would not assign moral virtue by ancestry. There is also a fourth possibility: isolation. A very small Neanderthal population survives in a remote region with limited contact until recent centuries. This is the version closest to a lost world story, but it is less stable over 40,000 years. Small isolated populations face inbreeding, disease, environmental change, and chance. Survival would require enough people and enough occasional contact to remain viable. If such a population reached the age of exploration, first contact could be devastating. Outsiders would bring disease and overwhelming political power. Scientists might treat living people as prehistoric specimens. The 20th century could contain a struggle to protect them from tourism, exploitation, and forced assimilation. This outcome reminds us that survival alone is not enough. A lineage can remain biologically alive while losing autonomy and culture upon entering a larger world. Which scenario is most likely? The honest answer is some combination of the first three. Contact and interbreeding would blur boundaries. Regional communities would preserve higher ancestry. Political history would sometimes strengthen separation and sometimes accelerate mixture. The present would contain a continuum, along with identities built at different points upon it. That complexity is scientifically more believable than two uniform species living side by side unchanged since the Ice Age. 40,000 years is a long time. It is roughly twice the time separating us from the height of the last glacial period and many times the length of recorded history. Every language spoken then is gone. Every political identity is gone. Most environments have changed. Neither lineage would arrive in the present untouched. To understand what this alternate world gives us, it helps to return briefly to what our world lost. There was no single final Neanderthal evening that archaeology can identify. The disappearance happened across a large territory. Some late communities vanished earlier, others later. Dates have uncertainty, and sites once described as last refuges have been re-evaluated as methods improved. By around 40,000 years ago, however, Neanderthals no longer appear as a distinct archaeological and genetic population. Whoever belonged to the last small communities did not know they were ending a lineage. Extinction is visible only from a distance. From inside, it looks like fewer neighboring fires, a marriage partner who never arrives, familiar hunting grounds changing, children surviving less often, and elders dying with knowledge that fewer people remain to learn. Imagine one family during that long decline. An older toolmaker is teaching a child to prepare stone. The child strikes at the wrong angle, producing a flake too thick for the intended scraper. The adult turns the core, demonstrates the sequence again, and lets the child try. We cannot prove that this exact lesson occurred, but complex skills do not persist for hundreds of thousands of years without learning. Somewhere, countless versions of it must have happened. Nearby, someone tends a fire. Another person returns with gathered plants. A hunter is moving carefully because an old injury aches in the cold. The group knows neighboring valleys and the seasons when particular animals pass. They have names for people, places, actions, and dangers, even though every one of those words is lost to us. A death occurs. The body is placed deliberately or perhaps protected in a natural hollow. We do not know what the act means to them. We should not fill every uncertainty with a modern ritual, but we can recognize attention. The dead person is no longer treated as an ordinary object in the landscape. At another site in another time, someone selects pigment, a shell, a feather, or a talon. Perhaps it marks identity, beauty, status, memory, or simple curiosity. The meaning is gone. The choice remains. This is why Neanderthals have moved closer to us as research improved. The old stereotype was built partly from absence. When archaeologists had few tools and incomplete dates, it was easy to interpret anything complex as modern human influence and anything simple as Neanderthal limitation. New discoveries complicated that pattern. Better excavation, residue analysis, ancient proteins, and DNA revealed behavior and relationships that bones alone could not show. Science has also corrected its own images. The famous stooped reconstruction based on the La Chapelle aux Saints skeleton helped shape the brutish caveman in popular culture. Later researchers recognized disease and age in that individual's posture. Modern reconstructions show upright people with distinctive but human faces. The correction is not complete. Popular explanations still swing between two extremes. One portrays Neanderthals as dim and doomed. The other turns them into gentle environmental sages who possessed every modern ability. Both erase uncertainty. Respect does not require pretending we know more than we do. We know they made effective tools, cared for injured people, used varied foods, interacted with other human lineages, and behaved in ways difficult to reduce to mere survival. We have strong reason to think they communicated richly. We have evidence consistent with symbolic behavior. We do not know the exact grammar of their speech, their myths, their humor, or whether every population practiced burial. We also know they were not one unchanging culture. Neanderthals occupied an enormous range for a very long time. A coastal community in Iberia and a group in Siberia separated by tens of thousands of years should not be treated as if they shared every custom. The word Neanderthal describes a lineage containing more diversity than the surviving sample can reveal. Ancient DNA has given some individuals back a small part of their family history. The Shagarskaya cave genomes revealed close relatives and a community with low diversity. Denisova 11 revealed a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. Early modern humans from Bacho Kiro carried recent Neanderthal ancestors only a handful of generations back. The abstract phrase interbreeding becomes a series of families. The word extinct can therefore mislead emotionally. Neanderthal communities disappeared, but ancestry entered later populations. The major pulse of gene flow, shared by many non-African people, occurred within a relatively narrow prehistoric period, and other encounters happened too. Natural selection removed some inherited segments and preserved others. Today, no living person is simply Neanderthal, but many carry pieces of that history. Some of those pieces influence biology. Archaic variants have contributed to immune responses and other traits. One Neanderthal-derived genomic region was associated with increased risk of severe COVID-19, while other archaic variants have been associated with different effects. Ancient adaptation is not a package of advantages. A variant useful in one environment can become harmful in another. The genetic legacy is real, but it is not the same as cultural survival. Genes cannot remember a story. They do not preserve a name or the feeling attached to a place. The alternate world we imagined contains something our world does not: uninterrupted communities able to transform their inheritance and speak about it. That is the particular ache inside the question. We are not merely imagining another set of faces in a city. We are imagining 40,000 years of books that were never written, languages that never evolved, political struggles that never happened, songs that were never composed, and ordinary lives that never had descendants able to remember them. At the same time, we should be careful with grief directed toward an entire ancient population. Neanderthals did not exist for us to save or mourn. They lived for themselves. Their lives had value before archaeology discovered them. The best tribute is not to turn them into symbols of innocence, but to let the evidence make them complicated. They hunted and probably competed. They suffered injuries. Their small communities may have contained cooperation, conflict, affection, jealousy, generosity, and fear. Being human-like does not mean being morally perfect. It means possessing lives that cannot be summarized by a tool type or skull. The alternate history also teaches a lesson about extinction in the present. A population can survive repeated hardship and still become vulnerable when several pressures arrive together. Low numbers, fragmented habitat, disease, climate change, and competition can interact. Resilience is not invulnerability. Conservation biologists know this pattern. A species may appear stable until connections between populations disappear. Then one fire, epidemic, or failed breeding season matters more. Protecting numbers, habitat, and movement before crisis is easier than rebuilding after a threshold has been crossed. Yet human lineages remind us that biological and cultural conservation require different ethics. We can protect an animal population through managed breeding in ways that would be unacceptable for people. A threatened human community has the right to choose its own future, including mixture and change. Preserving people cannot mean imprisoning them inside an identity. Our imaginary Neanderthals survive not because they remain pure, but because they adapt. They learn new technologies, change languages, marry neighbors, form states, migrate, and argue over tradition. Survival across 40,000 years would be a history of transformation. This may be the most important correction to the entire thought experiment. We began by asking what if Neanderthals had never gone extinct, as though survival meant carrying the ice age intact into a railway station. It does not. Nothing living survives that way. Life continues by changing. The Neanderthal family on the platform is not evidence that the past remained. They are evidence that a lineage found ways to move through every new present. A child learning evolution could look at classmates and see that ancestry branches without producing a hierarchy. The lesson would not be abstract. One family traces much of its history through ancient Western Eurasian populations. Another arrived from elsewhere more recently. A third contains both. None represents a higher stage. This could make the latter image of evolution much harder to teach. Instead of monkeys at one end and a modern man at the other, museums would show branching populations, exchanges of genes, extinctions, and survival. The central image would be a network. That network could influence how people understand identity beyond lineage. It would demonstrate that a category can be biologically meaningful in some contexts and socially misleading in others. It could encourage humility whenever someone claims that one visible difference explains a whole person, or people could ignore the lesson. Our capacity to understand complexity does not guarantee that we prefer it. Political slogans would still compress a network into two opposing faces. The struggle between knowledge and simplification would continue. Families would live inside that struggle in quiet ways. A mixed child might be asked which side they are really on. Another might be celebrated as proof that society has moved beyond prejudice and resent being turned into an argument. Parents would choose names that signal one heritage, both, or neither. Genealogy services would become even more popular and more controversial. Advertisements could promise to reveal your exact Neanderthal percentage. Scientists would explain that reference populations are imperfect and ancestry is distributed across segments, not contained in one essence. Customers would still compare numbers. Some people with little genetic ancestry might participate deeply in a Neanderthal language or community through adoption, marriage, or upbringing. Others with high ancestry might have no cultural connection. Debates over authenticity would be intense because biology and belonging would point in different directions. This world might develop a useful legal principle. Identity can be personal and communal, but rights are individual and universal. A person may claim heritage. A community may define membership through legitimate institutions, and neither may use ancestry to reduce another person's civil status. Applying that principle would remain difficult. Indigenous political rights often depend on collective continuity and historical relationship. Governments would need to recognize communities without turning genetics into a citizenship test. Courts would distinguish ancestry from nationhood. The existence of mixed communities would help. They would reveal that society does not collapse when categories overlap. People can inherit more than one tradition, speak several languages, and belong to several histories without dividing into fractions. This world could lead our own in bioethics because it had faced these questions longer, or it could carry deeper wounds from centuries of exploitation. Expertise often grows from harm. International medicine could benefit from broad genetic databases if communities trusted them. Researchers might identify therapies relevant to all humans by studying differences between lineages. But one scandal involving data misuse could damage cooperation for generations. Trust would be a scientific resource. It cannot be extracted from blood or sequenced from bone. It is built when institutions keep promises, share benefits, admit uncertainty, and allow people to refuse. A living Neanderthal population would force researchers to recognize that knowledge about someone is not ownership of them. That lesson applies beyond our thought experiment. Perhaps their survival would also change how we search for intelligent life elsewhere. Knowing two human lineages could coexist and communicate might make scientists less likely to imagine intelligence in one familiar shape. Contact with an extraterrestrial mind would still be unimaginably different, but humanity would have a deeper cultural memory of encountering relatives whose bodies and histories were not identical. Diplomats and philosophers might draw on ancient stories of first contact between Neanderthal and Homo sapiens communities. Most of those stories would be myths, not records, yet they could emphasize cautious approach, exchange, or tragic misunderstanding. They would become part of how Earth imagined meeting another intelligence. Spacecraft crews could include members of both lineages. Popular media would make too much of supposed differences in cold tolerance or spatial ability. The real requirements would be training, health, and cooperation. A Neanderthal astronaut would carry an identity into space without representing prehistory. The image would be powerful, two branches of humanity looking back at one planet. Would that make Earth feel more united? For a moment, perhaps. Shared perspective can widen identity, but it does not erase politics. The famous photograph of Earth from space changed how many people felt without ending conflict. A multi-lineage crew could symbolize common humanity while inequalities continued below. Symbols still matter. They give movements language for what institutions have not yet achieved. The deepest philosophical effect might be a shift from asking what makes us uniquely human to asking what kinds of relationship create moral responsibility. Neanderthals would be close enough that denying their personhood became untenable. The history of that recognition could make people suspicious of every moral boundary drawn solely for convenience. This does not mean the category human loses meaning. It means its meaning becomes ethical as well as biological. To be human could refer to membership in an evolutionary family containing more than one surviving branch. To be a person could refer to a bearer of interests, relationships, and rights. The two concepts would overlap without being identical. The distinction could help future debates about animals, artificial minds, and unknown forms of life. It would not answer them automatically. It would remind society that confidently excluding unfamiliar minds has a dangerous history. In our world, Neanderthals already perform a smaller version of this work. Every new discovery that reveals care, planning, or symbolism pushes people to reconsider the old boundary between them and us. The boundary does not disappear, but it becomes less useful as a ranking. What if they had never gone extinct? We might have learned that lesson not from fragments, but from neighbors. Let us spend one final day in the alternate world, from morning until night. Before sunrise, a radio presenter in a northern city reads the weather forecast in the national language and a regional Neanderthal language. The second broadcast exists because activists fought to preserve it when schools once punished children for speaking it. The language is not ancient in the sense of being unchanged. It contains words borrowed from traders, conquerors, scientists, and the internet. Its oldest roots may reach into communities that survived the Ice Age, but every generation remade it. In an apartment above a bakery, the family from the station wakes. The father checks the heating because he dislikes the cold, despite every joke made about his ancestry. The daughter insists she is too sick for school. Her mother notices that the symptoms appear only on the morning of the history presentation. At breakfast, the grandmother joins by video call. She uses the heritage language with her daughter and the national language with her granddaughter. On the wall behind her hangs a photograph from a civil rights march. She was a child when employment advertisements still openly preferred one lineage for office work and another for heavy labor. The granddaughter's presentation is about a burial discovered during construction of a railway tunnel. Genetic analysis connects the ancient individual broadly to populations from the region, but no direct family line can be claimed. The local community has requested reburial after limited study. Several scientists want more time. At school, the teacher asks the class to consider both positions. What knowledge could be gained? Who has authority over the remains? Does great age reduce a person's claim to respectful treatment? Does shared ancestry create ownership? The students disagree. The lesson is not designed to produce one answer. During lunch, two students argue about a viral video claiming Neanderthal children need a different diet. The source is a company selling expensive meal plans. A biology teacher explains that ancient people ate varied local foods and modern children should not be prescribed a Paleolithic identity. Across the city, the mother meets a patient whose ancestry report shows a variant associated with a higher average response to one drug. The patient asks whether that means the standard treatment is dangerous. She explains the size of the evidence, checks other health information, and orders a relevant test. Ancestry guides a question, not a verdict. The father attends a planning meeting about new buses. Older safety systems fit some facial shapes poorly, so the design team has tested sensors across a wider range. A colleague jokes that inclusive design is expensive. He replies that crashes are more expensive. The argument is practical, not symbolic. At the national parliament, lawmakers debate whether a genetic ancestry company may sell data to police. Supporters describe unsolved crimes. Opponents point to a history of lineage surveillance. A minister tries to promise that only serious cases will qualify. Civil rights lawyers ask who defines serious. In another country, a Neanderthal majority region is holding an independence referendum. Its politics include language, taxation, resources, and old discrimination. Foreign media reduce the entire debate to ancient tribal identity. Local journalists complain that this ignores schools and housing. At a university laboratory, researchers compare immune cells from volunteers across several populations. The project is directed by a mixed team and governed by a community board. Results suggest a pathway relevant to an autoimmune condition affecting people of many ancestries. The scientists are careful not to announce a cure before replication. In the museum district, Tourists queue for an exhibition about early human families. One case contains a replica of the Denisova 11 fragment. The label explains that she had a Neanderthal mother and Denisovan father. A visitor pauses at the word mother longer than at the word hybrid. Nearby, living Neanderthal artists have organized a counter-exhibition titled "We Are Not Your Reconstruction." It contains photographs of nurses, mechanics, dancers, parents, politicians, and children, each paired with an absurd question they have been asked about cave life. At a cafe, a university student is writing a novel set during first contact between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. She knows the characters' language and motives are inventions. Her author's note will explain the evidence and uncertainty. Fiction allows her to enter a silence science cannot fill, but she does not confuse imagination with recovery. In the afternoon, the daughter gives her presentation. She begins with the old burial and ends with the modern dispute. A classmate asks how she feels as a Neanderthal person. She says she feels nervous because everyone is looking at her. The room laughs, and the teacher moves to the next question. After school, she practices swimming. Her coach measures performance, not ancestry. Another club once tried to introduce lineage categories but abandoned the plan because mixed backgrounds and individual variation made the divisions arbitrary. The grandmother visits a language class in her neighborhood. Most students are adults. Some have Neanderthal ancestry. Others married into the community or simply love the language. A debate has emerged over whether outsiders should be allowed to lead revival projects. The grandmother says a language survives by being spoken, but leadership should include the people who carried it when speaking was difficult. At sunset, the family meets at the station. A delay has crowded the platform. The father brings coffee again. The mother checks messages from patients. The daughter is relieved that her presentation is finished. A tourist notices them and looks a little too long. Perhaps the tourist is fascinated, prejudiced, or merely uncertain. The family cannot know. They board the train. At dinner, the grandmother tells a story about the march in the photograph. The daughter has heard it many times. She listens anyway because this version contains a detail she does not remember. A Homo sapiens shopkeeper opened the door when police pushed protesters off the street. History is carried not only by categories, but by particular choices. Later, the news reports the parliamentary debate, the referendum, and the museum exhibition. A comedy program mocks the diet video. The daughter sends the clip to her friends. Before bed, she finishes an assignment about the human family tree. She draws branches that separate and meet again. The teacher has told them not to draw one form marching forward into another. Evolution is not a parade. She asks her mother whether Neanderthals would have gone extinct without Homo sapiens. Her mother says scientists still debate it. Small populations were vulnerable. Climate mattered. Competition mattered. Interbreeding mattered. The honest answer is that history rarely has one cause. Then the daughter asks the question underneath the question. Are we Neanderthals or humans? Her mother tells her that Neanderthal is one way of being human. The answer sounds simple because 40,000 years of history made it so. So what would have happened if Neanderthals had never gone extinct? The most likely answer is not that two untouched species would stand on opposite sides of the modern world. Continued contact would create a broad human family with overlapping ancestry. Some populations would remain recognizably Neanderthal through geography, culture, and long periods of marriage within communities. Others would blend until the boundary became mostly historical. By today, the question of who counts as Neanderthal would be answered differently by biology, law, family, and personal identity. Science would know more about the range of human biology. Medicine could learn from comparison, provided research respected the people whose bodies made that knowledge possible. Art and language would contain traditions our world never received. Philosophy and religion would have spent thousands of extra years confronting the fact that humanity, comes in more than one form. History might also contain additional systems of prejudice, forced classification, exploitation, and violence. Survival would not guarantee justice. It would create the opportunity for justice, which people would still have to choose and defend. The world could be more inclusive in some ways because visible human diversity was impossible to deny. It could be more divided in others because difference offers power and easy boundary to use. There is no biological fact that decides between those futures. Institutions, stories, and individual choices do. And daily life would eventually make the extraordinary ordinary. Neanderthals would not walk through modern cities as visitors from prehistory. They would have their own modern histories. They would be teachers and drivers, scientists and shopkeepers, believers and skeptics, conservatives and radicals, people proud of ancestry and people tired of discussing it. Some would live in communities preserving ancient roots. Some would know only that a grandparent once spoke another language. Some would have mixed families whose ancestry defied every census box. None would carry an obligation to represent 400,000 years each time they entered a room. That may be the clearest answer of all. If Neanderthals had survived, we would not spend every day thinking about Neanderthals. We would spend our days living among people. The imagined day ends, and the alternate world begins to recede. The referendum, the museum protest, the hospital consultation, and the family dinner become possibilities again. The railway station from the beginning of our journey is still there for a moment. Trains arrive. People hurry beneath the departure board. The Neanderthal family disappears into the crowd, not because their lineage has vanished, but because ordinary life has absorbed what once seemed extraordinary. Our world is different. There is no living community able to correct our reconstructions, reject our labels, or tell us which questions misunderstand them. We work with stone, bone, sediment, chemical traces, and fragments of DNA. Those fragments are enough to overturn the old caricature, but not enough to restore a language, a joke, a childhood nickname, or the sound of one particular voice. Some Neanderthal ancestry continued through the families formed when ancient populations met. That survival matters, but genes are not the same as a people continuing to speak for themselves. The alternate history preserves both biology and cultural continuity. It allows descendants to change, disagree, migrate, marry, forget, remember, and become modern on their own terms. Perhaps they would have broadened the meaning of humanity sooner. Perhaps societies would have created additional hierarchies and needed centuries of struggle to dismantle them. Most likely, both would be true in different places. Their presence would not make civilization automatically wiser. It would make one fact harder to avoid. A mind, a family, and a claim to dignity do not become less real because they arrive in a body shaped by another branch of evolution. That is why the most believable answer is also the least theatrical. Neanderthals would not remain Ice Age figures walking through modern streets. After 40,000 additional years, they would be citizens, neighbors, strangers, artists, laborers, scientists, politicians, grandparents, and children. Some would protect old languages. Some would know almost nothing about their ancestry. Some would carry distinctive features, while others would belong through family and culture more than appearance. The boundary would remain important in certain moments and disappear completely in others. Now let that world close for the night. Travel backward once more, beyond cities, laws, laboratories, and names recorded in writing. A fire burns inside a shelter somewhere in Pleistocene Eurasia. Wind presses against the entrance. Tools lie near the wall. An adult checks the embers while a child moves closer beneath a hide. No one around the fire knows whether their descendants will last another season, another century, or 40,000 years. They know only that the cold is outside and the people they depend on are here. In our history, The communities eventually faded as distinct populations. In the history we imagined, enough connections held. A winter alliance remained intact. A child survived. A language continued changing instead of falling silent. The difference between the two worlds may have been made from thousands of events too small to leave clear evidence. You do not need to hold all of those possibilities now. Let the timelines loosen. Let the crowded cities grow distant. Let the last questions settle beside the fire without requiring an answer. The ancient night continues. Breathing slows. The embers dim, but they are warm enough until morning. And for now, so are you. Sleep well.